So now that we've wrapped up all of the lights for our character, we have only one thing left in the scene to illuminate, and that is our audience. So let's go ahead and jump over to the whiteboard and talk about the lights that are going to be created in this video. Now, the illumination for the audience in the stadium is going to be broke up over 2 videos. In this video, we're going to be focusing primarily on frontal illumination and top-down illumination of our crowd. Starting off with a bounce light down here at the bottom, it will be a distant light illuminating the color red up onto all of our characters. This will be called something like Bleacher's Bounce. We'll also create a top-down light, which will be of type distant as well. That's going to give us that bluish gray feel that's going to be cast down on all of our characters from above. Finally, we'll create a distant light that's going to be placed in the center. This is going to act kind of as an ambient light. It will receive information from the camera so that when the camera does that pan across all of our audience members, our distant light will rotate with it, again keeping the illumination nice and easy as the camera sweeps around. So that's what's going to be put together in this video. In the next video, we will focus on all of the lighting for the rim lights for our audience. Steve?
Great, so let's jump over into Houdini, and I'm going to start off by creating a distant light to use for our bounce light. So I'm going to create a new distant light and create that at the origin. Now the position isn't important, but I am going to move this guy over to our bleachers just so that things make sense when we're looking in the scene. We can quickly identify this light as being the bounce light for the bleachers. And let's rename this distance light to Bleachers Bounce. I'm going to take this light, we need to rotate him up in X 90 degrees. And then I'm going to rotate over in Z a fairly large amount, nothing too significant. Let's have a look. Maybe more around the 25 degrees range, something like that. So that we're looking up at our audience, but we're mainly coming from underneath. So that's the positioning. Let's jump over and set up some of the basic light parameters. So our light color is going to be a mid-red. So let's grab a mid-red. Something like that will work great for us. And we're only going to be emitting diffuse with this light since it is a secondary light. It's much like our bounce light for the character. So that's the Bleachers Bounce setup. Now we can create another distance light. Create a distant light at the origin.
I'd like to point out that Steve's not worrying himself with the intensities for the simple fact that he'll have full control over the intensity in post-production.
Cool. And again, I'm positioning this guy just to make things clear in terms of looking at the scene. The position isn't actually important as it won't affect the illumination any. So let's rename this guy to Bleachers Top. And I'll rotate him down -90 in X. And then let's rotate in Z a small amount, not quite as extreme as with the bounce light, but maybe even less than that. Let's rotate back slightly. Around -7 degrees should work out just to give us a slight angle, so we're coming more from the front than just straight on from the top. And this is going to be set to, again, only emit diffuse, and it's going to have a sort of mid-blue, grey blue feel to it. So that's our bounce light and our top light. All that's left now is to create our light that's going to be used only for shot 1, and that's going to be effectively our audience ambient light. So let's create another distant light, and again enter to create that at the origin. And just to make things obvious what's going on, again position isn't actually important, I'm going to align this guy approximately speaking with our camera, so something like that. And I'm going to rename this to Audience Ambience. I'm going to take the rotate channels, and we can reference the rotate channels of our camera. So I'm going to grab the shot 01 camera, and let's grab RX, and I will copy that expression and enter, and set the RY to be match RY, and RZ to match RZ, so that between frame 1 and 220 that light is going to rotate around with our camera. Now in terms of light settings, I am going to leave this light set to emit diffuse. I don't want to emit specular, and I'm going to leave a light color of white, and then we can deal with coloring this light in post if we so wish. So with those lights set up, we can then turn around and see what effects these lights are having by enabling and disabling them and looking through that shot one camera is probably the easiest way to do this. So let's choose something around here, look through our shot 01 camera, and I'll start off by disabling our audience ambience, and let's disable our bleachers top so we're only looking at the bounce light, and let's fire off a render. It's worth noting again, we're not worrying about all the other objects that these lights would be illuminating because we're going to deal with that with the render script. So our bleachers bounce and bleachers top are only ever going to affect the audience and the stadium. The audience ambience is only ever going to affect the audience and is only ever going to be rendered for shot 1. So for shots 2, well, the audience isn't in shot 2, but for shots 3 and 4, even though we're going to see the audience, we're not going to get a weird ambient light effect because all of our other spotlights are casting illumination. Hang on a second.
That's great.
So let's deal with what's the easiest way of doing this? I'm wondering if I select everyone and disable them at once, if that's going to disable everyone. I think it's only going to affect the latest selected light. Oh no. Fantastic. So if we grab all our lights and disable them very quickly, so disable all of those. Secondary spots shouldn't be affecting it, main spots shouldn't be affecting it. We should now be able to fire off a render and see only the bleachers bounce. As we wait for the render. Much better. So here's our bounce light. Overly intense, but we're going to be able to fully control this with our compositing. We've got slight blue coming in from our secondary spots, but again, we're not going to actually render secondary spots on our audience, so this won't be a problem. So there's our bounce light coming in. Let's now disable our bounce light and enable our top light, and we can render that off.
That was quite an evil-looking audience that we had a second ago.
It really was, and we'll see when we come to compositing this in, if we were to play with our levels and really make the bounce light the focus of the lighting, it really does look very disturbing. As we give Houdini a second to take everything into account. There we go. So this is going to be our top-down light. And obviously we're actually getting the bounce light from the character having some effect on here as well. But we can see the top-down light giving us illumination just to the tops of the audience. But if we were to have bounce and the top, you can see their faces are very, very dull. And that's why we brought in our audience ambient light. So let's disable the bleachers top light and enable the audience ambience light and fire off another render. And this will really bring out all of the faces of all of our audience members. And because it's matching our camera's motion, no matter where our camera's looking, we'll be able to see the faces of our audience. And that's not actually an important thing for shots 3 and 4, because the fact that the audience aren't the focus, it doesn't matter that we can't really see their faces. The crowd at that point is going to be dark compared to our main character and the lights that are on him. But for this shot, since we're looking at the audience, it's very important that we can see all of their faces, because otherwise we'd just be looking at pretty much a dark scene, and that wouldn't make much sense. Cool. So I'm actually going to quickly go back through and enable all of the lights we just disabled, just so that when we come to setting up render passes, we don't have any issues with lights still being disabled and not getting rendered out. So if we enable those, and I will just flick back through, so that's enabled. They're all enabled. Oh, as I broke that, let's undo. Rewire that guy, so he is enabled. Can you remember any other lights that I possibly disabled earlier?
The big thing was just disabling all of the
character rig lights. Character rigs. The character bounce was still on. Secondary spotlights were left on, and the main spotlights were left on. Fantastic. So, yeah, it didn't take too long to get those 3 lights set up, but they're going to provide very useful illumination for our audience. And with that, that's going to conclude the first half of our audience lighting.
So in the last video, we had said that we had pretty much completed all of our lighting for the stadium with the exception of the rim lights that needed to be added in. But after close inspection of our lighting, we realized that there was something that was missed. If everyone would take a moment and think all the way back to the introduction for the lighting of the Talented Ball, you'll recall that we had put together the whiteboard explaining all of the lights and what each of their purposes were inside of the Talented Ball project. We had talked about our bleachers top light here, which basically provides a bluish gray illumination being cast almost straight down, just slightly tilted forward onto all of our characters. Now, we had said that this light needed to be a shadow casting light so that it would ground our characters to the benches. And in the last video, we got so carried away that we simply forgot to enable the shadow casting abilities of the light as well as check out the results and make any sort of adjustments necessary. We thought it would be really nice to go in and make this very clear, throw this video in because there are some special considerations with depth map shadows when we are making use of a distant light. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Steve to add this in.
Fantastic. So I'm going to grab our bleachers top, and as Jason was saying, we're dealing with a distant light here as opposed to a spotlight. And with a spotlight, we had a specific cone of light creating a circle of light on the ground, and we could imagine our depth map being in a square image that bounds that circle. But with a distant light, we don't have a specific region we're casting light in. We cast light everywhere infinitely. So how are we going to know where to map that shadow map to? Well, it's actually rather simple. We can look through our light. So if we come down to no camera, come down to look through light and select our bleachers top, what we see in the viewport, this square region here, is where our shadow map is going to be cast to. And it turns out this is actually part of our stadium. But what we can do, we can, on the light tab for our bleachers top, we can come down to spotlight options and we can boost up the orthographic width. And as we do so, we're going to see more and more of our scene within this shadow map area. So we can boost this up further and further and further until we get to the point where all of our stadium is going to be included within this shadow map. So this is fantastic. We're now going to have all of the shadows from our audience being cast onto our bleachers because all of this area is in our shadow map. But it's going to bring up an interesting issue. All of this area is in a shadow map. If the shadow map is of a low resolution, 1 pixel is going to be an extremely large area in terms of on our scene, in terms of on our benches. So what I'm going to do straight away is switch over to the Shadows tab, give us Depth Map Shadows, and set the shadow resolution up to 4096 by 4096. So that's going to give us a much higher resolution, the depth map, so that we're going to have more detail on our depth map shadows. But that alone is actually not going to be enough, and if we quickly fire off a render, switch to shot 1 to get us part of the way there.
Let's go ahead and disable some of the lights as well.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. So let's grab all of the characters' lights and grab our bounce light for the bleachers and our audience ambience and turn off light enabled and then fire off a render. And you're going to see that even though we increase that shadow map up, we're still going to have blocky shadows. If we just give Houdini a second to produce our render.
You're also going to find that no matter how much we talk right now, Houdini is still going to require time for all of the calculations necessary to generate that rendered image.
It doesn't seem to matter how long we talk, Endplay still doesn't show up. It's great. This is why there's a fast forward button on the video.
That's right.
Here we go. So we have a couple of issues.
Yeah.
It actually kind of looks really scary.
It looks like all of our characters have rolled around in the mud for a while.
Yeah.
A lot of self-shadowing.
We've got a lot of self-shadowing on the characters and very blocky shadows. So let's deal with the blocky shadows first, and then we can come back and deal with the self-shadowing afterwards. Now for the blocky shadows, we can quickly come in. I'm going to enable these lights we disabled just so we don't miss re-enabling any of them later. We can come in and we can set our pixel samples, and instead of sampling for every pixel, let's do 2 samples per pixel, and you'll see when we re-render, I do need to disable all those lights again. Give me a second to grab all these, and grab our character bounce, and disable, and re-render. We'll see that by upping the pixel samples to 2 by 2, we're going to smooth out the shadows enough that any of our cameras aren't going to notice that the shadows are blocky, which
that really
is important.
That really is the key thing here. Don't try to strive for perfect shadows if your camera's so far away that it's irrelevant, that you won't be able to tell. Keep that in mind. It's like we need Jeopardy music playing or elevator music playing or something.
Yeah, I guess.
In a world where Imblay calculates harder than any other... Okay, I'm just making stuff up, but here we go. So, yeah, that's looking a lot better.
So, yeah, they're a lot more circular in nature, enough that it doesn't matter from where we're looking from our camera. These are going to look like perfect circles, which is fantastic.
And while our self-shadowing is better, we still have some issues.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as here, but it's still pretty bad. And this is going to be as simple as changing a single parameter on our depth map settings, so it makes sense to clear it up completely. So I'm going to enable all these lights again, switch back over to our bleachers top, and I'm going to set our shadow softness, boost that up to a value of 1. And then I'm going to grab all of these guys and disable them. The only reason I'm enabling the lights again, deselecting, changing something, and then coming back and grabbing them is in case I was to miss something here. I don't want to leave a light disabled, and then if we didn't realize that and we go to render, that light would never get rendered out. So I'm now going to disable again and render one more time. And this will clear up all of these self-shadowing issues that we were having, because effectively we've blurred the shadow map enough that we're not going to get these small rings of shadow. There we go. Fantastic. So we can already see that we've got much cleaner results. So this is what we had originally. Boosting our pixel samples has helped out a little bit with the self-shadowing and really helped out with the circular nature of our shadows. Boosting up our shadow softness has cleaned up the rest of the issues that we were having with our self-shadows.
Excellent.
So I do want to go ahead and enable these lights again. And finally, if we pull out, we can see that boosting up the orthographic width of our light has created a massive light icon in our viewport. And that's kind of annoying. It's kind of going to get in our way. So what we can do, we can hide out our bleacher's top light by turning off its visibility. It's still going to be included in renders and will still light our scene. We're just not seeing the basically the graphical representation in the viewport, which is going to help out a huge amount because it's kind of just irritating. And with that, we've added shadows to our bleacher's top-down light. And in the next video, we're going to now go ahead and add our rim lights for our audience. So thanks a lot.